like, I have 3 advanced placement class things, and one of them I have 3 textbooks in, and I have to start reading the textbooks and stuff. I said I have 3 for one class.
Alright, you're all back in school, right?
Yeah.
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 Middle school's not like some weird thing where they start in September or something. Okay. We're gonna have a school pep talk real quick. The reason we did the deep study of Hosea and 1 John in the summertime is because that's whenever you guys have the most time. It's the easiest for you guys to dig in deep. But whenever something like the school year hits, stuff kind of gets shoved to the side, right? Alright, I'm gonna tell you now. Complete sincere honesty with you guys. If you don't carve out time now, you'll never find time to carve out down the road. I know that's crazy hard, especially when you're in advanced placement classes, and you got assignments you're supposed to read and homework you gotta do. But if you take all of that stuff and you throw studying the word to the side, and then you get out of school, let's say you go to college, or you start training to go to work if you don't go to college. Then you are spending all of your time doing college work or training for a new job or career. And then you get a job and you get married and you have kids. And you have kids stuff all the time, and you have your wife and stuff to do there, so you don't find time there. And then you end up being my age with a boatload of kids, or a lot of other stuff going on in your life. I don't know anybody in this day and age that isn't busy in their life. They're always running, doing something. You can't find time. So then you find yourself in your 40s and 50s and you start getting grandkids, and that's even worse because now there's more family members that you get to do stuff with. You don't have to do stuff with them. You get to do stuff with them. And then, that was a smile. I saw that smile. Then you end up in your 60s and you're sitting there going, where did all the time go? And I should have studied more because I don't know as much as I should. I'll just throw this out. Whenever we were at Oldfield, there was a congregation full of people. A lot of them had been Christians for twice as long as I had been alive. And when it came time to teach Bible class, nobody would step up and do it because they didn't feel like they knew enough because they hadn't studied starting at your age. So if you take this age and you make a habit out of cutting time out of your schedule and making that God's time to study, not even necessarily to read something extremely in depth, but just to think hard on things as you go throughout your day, you will set a pattern for yourself where no matter what's happening in your life, you will be able to find time for God. It doesn't have to be every single day you carve out an hour and a half to sit down and study hard, but you need to find some time. As you go through your school day, be thinking about what you read or what you studied in class on Sunday or what you're studying in advance for class on Sunday, or what you heard in a sermon that was really good that spurred you on to study some more. If you don't do those things now, you're setting yourself up for a pattern of failure down the road. You're going to find yourself being old, going, where did the time go? I don't know as much as I should. What I'm trying to do for you guys now is to make you guys better than I am when you get to my age, so you don't repeat the same mistakes I did. Because I had a busy schedule. When I went to college, it didn't get any better, and I didn't carve any extra time out, and now I'm playing catch up. And it is really hard to play catch up to learn the stuff you should have learned 10 years ago. Does that make sense? So even though it's crazy hard, and don't fail and tell your parents that I told you to fail in school, but make sure that you are cutting time out and setting it aside for God. Okay? No matter what you have to do, if you have to drop an extracurricular activity, guess what? It won't be the end of the world if you get to dedicate some extra time to God. Make sense? Okay. Do you have a Bible?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I do, just not right
Yeah, I know
now.
what you mean. I give you mine, but mine.
Here it is.
So, we are going to talk about marriage this week. I know none of you guys are married or in the immediate vicinity of being married in the next week or two.
I do know.
I think you don't have time now in school, get married and see what happens. Real quick, just describe to me what marriage is. A love for someone that's forever. That's really good. It's like a Hallmark card. What else?
A commitment.
Okay, it's a commitment. It's not just a love, it's a commitment.
Sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice. See, that's not what everybody wants to put on the Hallmark card, but you're right. It's not just a love. There is a forever love involved there, but it is not love alone. Because I can love someone forever and they never be my wife. I can love my kids forever, but it's a different kind of love than I have for my wife. Instead of forever, let's sub in the word for life, if that makes sense. Because as long as you are alive, you will have that special kind of love for your spouse. But will we be married in heaven?
Yes, I don't know.
You say no, you said yes, I don't know. No, Jesus got the Pharisees and scribes were trying to back him into a corner, so they asked him, this woman was married to 7 brothers, she didn't have children with any of them, which one is she going to be married to in heaven? They were trying to trick him. And he said, there will be no marriage in heaven. That's a shorthand answer of what he said, but there won't be marriage in heaven. So marriage is just for this lifetime. It is a temporary bond for this life. Let's look at some of the things that make up a marriage. Love. What kind of love?
Agape love.
Okay. Very good. Love. What else? There's more than agape love in marriage. We already said one of those words. You said that, I believe.
Commitment.
Yeah. There's commitment. What else? Here's one you guys aren't going to get that I want.
I would say sacrifice again, but that kind of goes with agape.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Okay, so what's the question again?
what makes up marriage. What are things that marriage is composed of?
God first.
Okay. God. That's a good one. And let me tell you why. Because if God is the first priority in your marriage, then you'll have 1,000 less problems in your life. If you have 2 people that are married and they both want worldly things, those things are not always going to be the exact same, and so they're going to be struggling. Well, I want this. Well, I want this. Well, if you have God first, you can always be united in your first priority of serving God and of raising godly children. What else? This one kind of goes with God. Servanthood. This is one I really want to pound into your head. Servanthood is part of marriage. That is not something you're going to get on a Hallmark card. That is not something you're going to hear about in a Disney story. That is not something you're going to hear in a marriage ceremony necessarily. But servanthood is part of marriage. If you go into marriage wanting something and only marrying that person because you get something out of that arrangement, because you get to be intimate with your wife, or because your wife is a fantastic cook, or because your husband makes a lot of money, if you are simply entering into that arrangement because you get something out of it, you are not going to cherish that relationship. But if you go into it with a mindset of servanthood, of it initially serving God, but also serving your spouse, your marriage will be far better off. Because instead of going into it with an attitude of I can get something out of it, you go into it with the attitude of what can I do for that person. So, if we are looking at serving our spouse, what does that look like?
Well, like if they're sick or something like that, just like helping them out and stuff
Okay,
like
caring
that.
for them while they're sick. It's in the marriage vows. That's good. What else? the typical marriage vows. What else?
Taking care of the kids sometimes.
Taking care of the kids. Let me tell you something. Kids are exhausting. They will wear you out. And there are going to be times whenever you want to just thump their little heads and shove them off on your spouse. But caring for them is a way of serving your spouse. What else?
Cleaning, I guess.
All right, cleaning. We're looking at the really simple stuff. Doing the dishes whenever somebody else hates doing the dishes. Simple stuff like that is a way of serving your spouse. But what about a complex way to serve your spouse?
Being there for them emotionally.
All right. Being there for them emotionally. Being there to support them whenever they're struggling with life. Being there to hear their complaints whenever they feel like they have a legitimate complaint, even if it's against you, even if it's against your family or their family. What about helping to push them to be a better Christian? If there's something in their life, if you are serving God initially, you can always push them or drive them more so than ask them to serve God with you. And if both of you are doing that, it will always be easier to serve God and do what is right. If one of you begins to falter, the other one can help pick the other one up and encourage them. Let's run to Ephesians 5. I'm going to run out of time. We need to look at how the family is formed. We're going to start studying the family, starting with marriage, then we're going to go to parents, then to children, then to divorce, and then to... what's the other one I had? I don't know. There's another one behind that. It's going to be good. So good I forgot the name. Somebody, let's just read together 22 through 24. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Alright, so how is the family is formed? Let's put it in a chain form. Who is the top of the chain? There we go. I was hoping somebody would say the wrong one, but you're right. God is the top of the chain.
I was about to, so you know.
God is the top of the chain. If you look at it as husbands are the top of the chain, then you get this feeling of women are suppressed. Women are suppressed because they're under the patriarchy of the husbands, right? But if you look at it with God being the top, then the husbands are in submission to God. There is no human that is not in submission in a marriage. It's just who they are in submission to. So you have God. Then who do you have? I kind of already gave it away. Husbands. All right, the husband. Why is the husband the top of the chain of the family?
Because the wife is supposed to serve.
Okay, let's look farther back than that. You're right, but
Because Adam was made first.
Adam was made first, and who sinned first? A little more specific than womankind. Eve sinned first. And God, as part of the kicking them out of the garden, put her in submission to Adam. And there are some other passages that talk about that in greater detail. So under the husband, we have the wife. We have the wife. Does it make a woman any less valuable that she is under submission to her husband?
No.
No, it doesn't at all. Because if we view women in the idea of they are less valuable because they are in submission to a husband, or they are less useful or profitable for God than the husband because they're in submission, then how do we view husbands? They're inferior because they're in submission to God, right? Why did God set it up where men and women have different roles in the church and in the family?
I'd like to just think that it's because he made them differently.
Okay? Men and women are different. It really boils down to that. If you try to switch the roles in the family and make the husband the mother of the children, and the wife the breadwinner of the family that wears the pants and runs the whole family and everybody is under her thumb, I've never seen that pan out well. Never seen it pan out well at all in personal experience. If you do that, the kids end up wanting their mother, and they regret or are really kind of hurt that the mother doesn't spend as much time with them as they feel that they should get. And the dad is a beat down dad that tries to find different ways to pacify his feelings of inferiority because he's under his wife's thumb. We've all probably seen someone and you just kind of laugh and go, well, we know who wears the pants in that family. That's saying that the woman is in charge of the man. That's not the way it should be. Now, who is underneath the husband and the wife? Good job. Kids, children. Why is my pen dying? Kids. Why are kids under the submission of the husband and the wife?
Because they have to like be guided by them, so they can live right and like learn.
You're right. If you don't learn submission to your parents, you will not learn submission to God. If your parents fail at instilling a sense of authority in your life, you will fail to recognize the authority of people at school, of your boss at work, of the owner of your company that you're working for, of the police whenever they try to stop you for breaking a law of the land, of the government. You will fail to recognize the authority of anyone that you disagree with. And that leads to a very difficult, troubled life. And we'll stop there because we need to not ruin the lesson on kids and parents and such. But recognize that you as younger people, Jacob's out of the house, but you as younger people are still under the submission of you should be submissive to your parents. You are under the authority of your parents. Don't resent that, don't hate that, recognize it as a God-given way that your family is supposed to be organized. Even though it's always difficult, you don't always want to do what your parents say. It is for the best. Now, let's run back to Malachi, chapter 2.
I gotta say, I'm not out of the house yet.
You're not. I thought you were.
No.
Never mind. Completely disregard what I said.
I mean, right now I am, but I'll be back later.
I got you. All right. Verse 11 of chapter 2 of Malachi. Judah has been faithless. Malachi's right before Matthew. Last book in the Old Testament.
Oh. I should know that, but
You always know that because you say Malachi with authority because it's the end of the Old Testament book song. Malachi. Almost there. All right, chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 11. Judah has been faithless. An abomination has been committed in Israel and Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. It sounds a lot like Hosea. He's chastising them for breaking their covenant that they made with God. May the Lord cut off from the tents of Jacob any descendant of the man who does this, who brings in an offering to the Lord of hosts. I was down in 14, not 12. All right. He says, why does God not regard the offering or accept that offering with favor from his hand. Why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. So guard yourselves in your spirit, and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth. How long is marriage for?
Life.
All right, for life.
25 to life.
If you're lucky to live that long. What is the one exception to this?
If you're
Adultery.
yeah.
We can jump in and steal her thunder. All right, fornication, which is adultery if you're married. The one exception to that is fornication. Where do we find that?
Somewhere.
Matthew,
Oh, I got it in the Bible.
okay, Matthew 19:9.
This is part of the Sermon on the Mount, right?
No, he talks about this in Matthew 5:32, which is in the Sermon on the Mount. But in Matthew 19:9, he goes into greater detail on it. So that's why we usually go to Matthew 19:9. But Matthew 5:32 also counts. So we'll give you a thumbs up on that one. But whenever Jesus is talking about marriage in Matthew 19, I want you guys to commit that passage to memory down the road whenever we talk about divorce, because it is so important. If we are looking at marriage as something that is for life, then we will take it much more seriously going into it. And we need to understand why it is for life too, and Malachi 2 shows us that. Verse 15, did he not make them one? He takes two people, and he joins them together in a covenant relationship. Where's 15? With a portion of the Spirit in their union. So God has taken two individual people that are not bound to each other, and he puts them together in a unique relationship that is separate, alone unto them from everybody else. Now, everybody else can get into their own covenant relationship with a different person, but God joins them together. If you go back and you look at Adam and Eve, it is really interesting that whenever God created Adam, he saw that there wasn't a wife for him or a companion for him. He makes Eve, and he stopped. We always just take that for granted, but God made Eve for Adam, and then he stopped. He could have made another wife, or 6 wives, or 100 wives, or 1 wife and 5 husbands, but he stopped at 1 man and 1 woman, and he joined them together in the first marriage ever in humankind. It's significant that he stopped at 1, because that was enough. That was the proper number. And Genesis even goes so far, I believe it's in Genesis 5, to show us where someone finally broke away from that pattern of 1 man and 1 woman and started the practice of polygamy. He married 2 wives. And anytime you look in the Old Testament at a person who commits polygamy, who is married to more than 1 spouse, nothing good ever comes from it. Nothing good. You have people that resent each other because one is always the favorite. Look at Rachel and Leah with Jacob. Look at Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. Look at David and his wives. You look at Solomon and his wives and what happened there. Nothing good ever comes from polygamy. Ever. Yes?
I have a question. This is off topic, but how were more people made other than Adam and Eve's sons and stuff?
The sons married their sisters, and then they just kept growing from there. We only learn about Cain, Abel, and Seth from there. But then we know they also had daughters. That's a really common question, is where did Cain get his wife? They married their sisters. If you even go back to Abraham, his wife Sarah was his half-sister. So they married out of their families for generations and generations, even down after the flood. That practice fell out and is now frowned upon deeply. So, make sense?
I got,
hard for us to wrap our minds around
I
that.
got another question for you
Okay.
while we're interrupting you.
Okay.
So it says that if the only way for divorce to be okay in God's eyes is adultery, does that like mean like they have to get divorced, or they can try to work it out?
No, they can definitely work it out, and I would say that a godly Christian should try to work it out. And the reason for that is you go back and you look at Hosea, right? Hosea's wife had cheated on him, had ran off, and God could have said, cut her off, it's time. But he told her to go and try to get her. Now, he didn't necessarily have to force her. If she was going to keep running off and committing adultery, then by all means, then he could be justified in divorcing her. But if you look at Matthew 19, I believe what he's talking about there is unrepentant adultery. So technically, you would meet the terms to get a divorce if your spouse cheats on you one time and makes a mistake and regrets it sincerely. And they should never have ever done that. I don't want to try to pacify that at all. But I believe as a Christian spouse, you should try to work it out with that person if they're genuinely repentant. Now, on the flip side, if your spouse is running around town sleeping with everybody and has no show of remorse, no sign of repentance, cut it off. Get divorced and don't feel that bad about it. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Where was I? Okay. God takes two people and he puts them together. He stopped at one for each other, one man and one woman. We always say that in kids sing. Or we hear the kids say that in kids sing. Marriage is one woman for one man for life. But we need to be careful in memorizing those phrases to understand where that comes from in the Bible, or why we actually believe that in the Bible. And one more thing I want to look at is John 13. Hold on. I lied. Let's go back to Malachi 2. This is going to be in the afternoon lesson. We're going to be in Malachi. Okay, verse 16. For the man who does not love his wife but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence, says the Lord of hosts. So guard yourselves in your spirit and do not be faithless. God is saying that if you don't love your wife and you divorce her, or if you don't love your husband and divorce him, that you are faithless. You're covering your garment with violence, he says. So guard yourselves in your spirit. It is a matter of salvation if you abandon your spouse and do not return to them. And that is something that is a big issue today because divorce has become very prominent in our culture. Divorce rates are actually dropping. Does anybody know why?
I think fewer people are getting married.
That's it. Fewer people are getting married. Okay, the people that are together, instead of getting married and having all the issues that they see with marriage come into their relationship, they just shack up together and sleep together. And that's it. But divorce is still a major problem in our culture. Despite the fact that marriage rates are dropping, divorce rates are still very, very high. And anything that's an issue in the world almost inevitably floods over into the church at some point and becomes an issue, because where are people being converted out of? The world. So the people that have problems in the world, whenever they become Christians, sometimes they bring in what you might call baggage. Okay, divorces from before they were a Christian, including but not limited to improper divorces. So we have to be aware of what God's teaching is on marriage and on divorce. All right, flipping over to John 13. Let's start in verse 3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garment, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist, and he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This is Jesus washing the apostles' feet during the Last Supper. I've talked about this before in class, but these guys walked around in open sandals on dusty roads. Their feet were dirty. Whenever they came in, it was common practice for a servant or someone who was the lowest to wash the other people's feet. Well, they would argue about who is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and they refused to wash the other people's feet. So Jesus gets down on his feet, or on his knees, and begins washing their feet. Puts himself, even though he was the creator of the universe, the king and majesty and glory, he got down on his knees and washed their feet to teach them a lesson. We as a husband and wife, or you guys as a future husband and wife, should be willing to get down on our knees and do the stuff that the other person doesn't necessarily want to do. And not hold it over their head, not lord it over them with what I'm doing for you. I'm so much better than you. But do it with a sincere heart because you love that person. I want you guys, and especially at your age, to think of marriage very, very seriously. To understand that it is a lifelong contract, if you will, that carries spiritual implications. It can be much easier to go to heaven if you are married to a godly spouse. It can be so much harder to go to heaven if you are not married to a Christian spouse. It can be easy to go to heaven if you're single for your entire life in some cases, or it can be much, much harder. Depends on you, depends on your life, depends on the circumstances. But you need to look at marriage in a very, very serious way. Anytime you not only go to a wedding, that's whenever everybody starts suddenly thinking about marriage. Not only when you go to a wedding, but whenever you see married people together. I am very much encouraged by people that have been married for a long time, or by people that have been married by a short time that are godly. Fred and Norma have been married that long because of their backgrounds and their former spouses passing. But they're encouraging to me. Jim and Debbie, Mom and Dad, Gary and Carol, people that have been married for a very long time are always an encouragement to me. I've only been married for 10 years. I have to think for a second. 10 years. And it seems like a very, very, very long time. But we have grown so much closer over those 10 years than we were before we were married. Now, I want you guys to think about this as well. Is it possible to be happy in a marriage where you did not get a say in who you married?
No.
No? It is. And to show you that, let's go back to Genesis 24. I don't know that I'll have time to unpack this the way that I want. Who gets married in Genesis 24?
Abraham and, hold on.
No, Abraham's married and his wife just died in 23.
Oh, dang it.
All right. In 62, Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roy and was dwelling in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel, and she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So after Sarah dies, Abraham sends a servant back to his family's house to get a woman to marry his son. Isaac has never met Rebekah. Rebekah has never met Isaac. And even though they did not have a completely perfect marriage, he loved her sincerely. Isaac has fewer problems than either Abraham, his father, or Jacob, his son, or Esau, his son, because he is the only one out of that crew that was married to one woman for the entire time. We never see Isaac with another woman other than Rebekah. Even though it was an arranged marriage that they had never seen each other before, they didn't know who they were getting or what they liked or what they looked like or how she cooked or how good he was at listening to her, they loved each other. Arranged marriages could very much work, and they still do in many cultures, if you go into it with the mindset of, I'm going to love this person because I'm committed to them. Even though I have no say in who I get, I'm going to be committed to that person. So I'm going to tell you guys, it is much less to do with who you enter into marriage with than the mindset of both people entering into that marriage. It doesn't matter if you've never met a person before, if you are both servants of God, committed to God first and to your spouse, if you get married together, you can have a successful marriage. Do not rate marriage by what you see in the movies, by what you see on TV, by what you hear about, and even by what you see around you. If you look at everybody else's marriages on Facebook and then judge your own marriage by what you see on Facebook, you are going to come away very disappointed and feeling like you're the worst spouse in the world. But if you stay committed to God and to what His ideals are, your marriage can be successful. I want to tell you guys this now. We're running out of time. Thankful Jim's running just a little bit long. If you guys are thinking about this now, you will avoid the mistakes that I have seen people make in generations past. I can't tell you how many times I have seen someone who is a Christian, they're in my left hand here, they love somebody that's in my right hand who is not a Christian. And then you have someone who tells them, well, you guys, you need to marry a Christian. So this person's like, oh no, I'm going to lose this person if I don't become a Christian. So they become a Christian. They get baptized, and everybody's like, oh, this is the best thing in the world. And then they get married, and in some cases, that works because the person over here was sincere. Your dad's a pretty good case of that. Because he was not raised in the church, he became a Christian after he was dating your mom. They're still together, and they're still here today. On the flip side, sometimes this person really resents being forced into something to keep the person that they wanted to marry. And so instead of staying faithful in the church, they decide after being married for 5 or 10 or 2 or 15 or 20 or 30 years, they want to go back to the way things were. And so they peel away and either leave their spouse, or they stay married, but they start going back to a different God, if you will. They'll go back to a denomination. And whenever that happens, it just about sets your marriage in shambles. Because now you have two people that are not aligned with the same goal trying to walk together. Paul talks about being equally yoked. I don't know if you've ever seen cattle that are yoked together pulling a plow in an old movie or something. You don't see it anymore out in the fields. But if you have somebody that's pulling really hard this way, it's always going to veer you off if you're yoked together. Okay? If you are a husband who is married to a person that is not committed to serving God, and they keep trying to pull you away, it is going to be extremely hard to stay on the straight and narrow. It's possible, but it's going to be much, much, much harder. So if you guys are thinking about this now, and you're taking marriage seriously, whenever it comes time to start seriously pondering whether or not to marry someone, you can avoid making the mistakes of people in generations past. Looking at it seriously, by understanding it's a lifelong commitment, by being dedicated to serving God with that person and to serving that person, recognizing how God has laid out the family, and for good reason. Does anybody have any more questions?
Just something to say. I take back what I said earlier about you said if anybody could be happy in a forced marriage thing.
Arranged marriage, not
Or
forced.
arranged.
You don't want a shotgun wedding, but
No, but arranged marriage. But
that is very much a cultural thing. We very much go, that's awful that someone's marrying someone they've never met before, because that's completely contrary to what we've been raised with. But in fact, it worked very well in biblical times. It worked fantastic for the Israelites whenever they were in faithful periods of serving God. So it very much boils down to our mindsets, much more so than finding that one person that could give us true happiness. All right, thanks guys.
I feel like that can go really bad at the same time.
It depends on the mindset. Just like, regardless of whether you know that person or not, if your mindset is